ever been handed something you weren't ready for? Not a gift, a weight. A job you didn't earn, a title you didn't ask for. Eyes suddenly all pointing at you, waiting to see if you're gonna be half the man the last one was. Now listen, I read a book by a fella named Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Covey says most of us try to fix our lives from the outside. New technique, new trick, new smile in the mirror. And it never takes. Because real change, he says, has to come from the inside out. From who you are before it ever gets to what you do. That idea reminded me of a story. Story of a young man, a wooden ship, and a sea that doesn't care who your father was. Let me tell you about Captain Jonas. Jonas was 29 years old. The year was 1850, and 3 weeks before our story starts, they put him in charge of a whaling ship out of Nantucket, the Mary Ann. 3-masted bark, 42 men aboard, provisioned for a 3-year voyage to the Pacific. His father had been the previous captain, 30 years on the water, a legend in the harbor. Died the winter before, and the owners, out of loyalty more than wisdom, handed the ship to the son.
The crew knew it. Oh, they knew it. Jonas would give an order, and somebody would cough. Give another, and a man would spit on the deck, just close enough to his boot to not quite be an insult. The first mate, a broad, red-bearded man named Hull, 20 years older than Jonas and twice as respected, would repeat every command the captain gave, but louder, so the men knew whose voice actually moved the ship. And Jonas did what young men do when they're scared. He got louder himself, punished harder, cut the rum ration, lectured the crew at sunset about discipline, while they stared at their boots and waited for him to finish. The ship didn't get tighter, it got looser. At the last port before the open Pacific, 2 men deserted in the night, took their sea chests and vanished into the hills. And the clouds on the southern horizon were starting to stack. That night, Jonas sat on the quarterdeck with his father's old logbook open on his knees, coming apart, muttering to himself, "Why won't they obey? If only I had a proper crew. If only my father were here. If only..." A voice came out of the dark behind him.
If only, if only. That's a dead man's song, Captain. It was Eben, the old harpooner, 64 years old, face like a walnut, had been sailing with Jonas's father since before Jonas was born. He sat down on a coil of rope without being invited, because at 64, nobody invites you anywhere. You just sit. Jonas said, "They won't follow me, Eben. I've tried everything." And Eben said, and I want you to hear this, because this is the line the whole voyage turns on. Eben said, "You're trying to be obeyed, son. Try being trusted." Jonas didn't answer. Eben stood up, creaked, and walked back into the dark. Now, Covey writes about this exact moment. He says there's a difference between the personality ethic, tricks, techniques, louder voices, bigger threats, and the character ethic, integrity, patience, humility. And Covey quotes Emerson, "What you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you say." Jonas had been shouting. The crew had been listening to who he was underneath the shouting. A frightened boy in his father's coat. The next morning, Jonas did something no one on that ship had ever seen a captain do. He called Hull into his cabin. The big red-bearded first mate came in, expecting a fight, maybe a firing. Jonas pointed at the chair across from him and said, "Sit down. I want to listen to you. I haven't once. Tell me what this ship needs."
Hull sat, crossed his arms, waited for the trick. And when no trick came, he started talking. For 2 hours. About the watches, the rations, the route, the men, the grudges. Jonas did not interrupt, did not defend. He just listened.
This right here, friend, is Covey's Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Covey writes that most of us listen with the intent to reply, not the intent to understand. He calls the real kind empathic listening, listening with ears, eyes, and heart. And he writes that next to physical survival, the greatest need of a human being is psychological survival. To be understood, to be affirmed, to be validated, to be appreciated. Hull hadn't been heard in 3 weeks. When he finished talking, Jonas said, "I need you, Hull. I can't captain this ship without you. You can't captain it without me. If we fight each other, we both lose. If we work together, we both win. What would it take to make this a win for both of us?" That is Covey's Habit 4. Think win-win. Covey's careful about this one. He says win-win is not compromise. Compromise is 1 + 1 = 1.5. Win-win is both parties walking out with more than they walked in with. An abundance mentality instead of scarcity. Hull uncrossed his arms, and the Mary Ann had a first mate again. That afternoon, Jonas took down his father's chart of the Pacific, and he and Hull spread it across the cabin table. And Jonas said, "Before we chase one more whale, I want to know what we're really out here for. 3 years from now, when we sail back into Nantucket Harbor, what does the ship look like? What do the men carry home? What kind of captain am I, standing on this deck?" Covey calls this Habit 2, begin with the end in mind. He writes that all things are created twice. There's a mental creation and then a physical creation. You build the ship in your head before you build it with wood. Most men, Covey says, live the second creation without ever bothering with the first. And then they wonder why their lives drifted somewhere they never meant to go. Jonas and Hull sat at that table until the lamp burned low. And by the time they stood up, they had a chart. Not just of latitudes and currents, a chart of what kind of voyage this was going to be. Next came the men. Jonas had been chasing every pod of porpoises, every spout on the horizon, because it felt like action. Hull pointed at the map with one thick finger and said, "Captain, the sperm whales are here, 4 weeks south. Everything between us and there is a waste of powder and rope." Jonas nodded. No more vanity chases. They would sail hard and rest hard, toward the one thing. Covey calls this Habit 3, put first things first. He draws a little box, 4 quadrants, urgent and important. And he says the whole secret of an effective life lives in the important but not urgent quadrant. Planning, prevention, relationships, preparation. Covey says, direct quote, "Trust is the highest form of human motivation. It brings out the very best in people." Jonas stopped motivating with fear, started motivating with trust. And the men, slowly, started moving different. He did one more thing. He gave the crew Sundays, half watches, extra sleep, a proper meal, time to mend their own clothes, write letters home. Covey has a whole habit about this. Habit 7, sharpen the saw. He tells a little story. A man sawing a log for hours, getting nowhere, and somebody says, "Why don't you stop and sharpen the saw?" And the man says, "I don't have time to sharpen the saw. I'm too busy sawing." Covey says, a life without renewal, physical, mental, spiritual, social, is a dull blade pretending to be busy. Jonas had been running his crew dull. Now he was letting them sharpen. And somewhere in all of this, Jonas himself changed. He stopped saying, "if only." Stopped saying, "they make me," and "he forces me," and "the crew won't let me." Started saying, "I choose. I will. I prefer." Covey opens the whole book with this, Habit 1, be proactive. He quotes a man named Viktor Frankl, a doctor who survived terrible things in Europe, who said, "Between stimulus and response, man has the freedom to choose." Covey calls that little gap the most powerful real estate in a human life. Most folks never notice it's there. They get a stimulus, fire back a response, and call that their personality. Covey says no. In that gap is where you become a human being. Jonas found the gap, and he started living in it. 7 months out, they found the great whale. Biggest sperm bull any of them had ever seen. A moving mountain. The kind of creature that a year ago would have thrown the Marianne into chaos. The captain screaming, Hull countermanding, the boats going out ragged and scared. Not this time. Jonas gave one order. Hull repeated it, not louder, just clearer. The boats went down smooth as poured water. Eben stood in the bow of the lead boat, harpoon steady. Every man knew his job, because every man had been asked what his job should be, and every man had agreed to it. Covey calls this Habit 6, synergize. He says the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 3 or 10, when real trust and real difference come together. And he says you can only get there after the first 5 habits have done their slow, patient work. The Marianne moved as one body that afternoon, and she came home. 3 years later, Jonas sailed back into Nantucket Harbor with a full hold and a whole crew. Every man who left came home. Hull stood at his right hand. Eben stood at his left. Somebody on the dock asked him, "How'd you turn that ship around?" And Jonas said, "I stopped trying to be obeyed. I tried being trusted." Now let me ask you something, friend, and I want you to really sit with this one. Where in your life are you trying to be obeyed instead of trusted? The folks in your house, the folks you work with, the one looking back at you in the mirror. Are you shouting louder, punishing harder, and wondering why the ship keeps leaking? Drop it in the comments. Not the excuse, the place. Naming it is the first move. Here's the thing. Covey's book isn't a set of tricks. It's 7 slow, patient turns of the rudder. Be proactive. Begin with the end in mind. Put first things first. Think win-win. Seek first to understand. Synergize. Sharpen the saw. You do those in that order for a long enough stretch of water, and the crew of your life starts pulling with you instead of against you. If you've got a ship that's leaking, a family, a team, a marriage, a business, please go pick up Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Read it slow. Read it with a pencil. And if this old grandpa's story meant something to you tonight, tap that like button. Subscribe so I can find you again next week. Because a loud captain can bully a ship across a harbor. But a trusted one? A trusted one can bring her home.